Hello, and welcome to the Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund informational session. My name is Sylvie Piquet, and I'm a program director at Maine Development Foundation, MDF. MDF is a statewide nonprofit focused on community and economic development, and MDF serves as project manager for Maine and an administrator for the Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund. Also with me today from MDF is Perry Williams. Perry, if you want to give a wave, as well as Holly Heyman, our finance director. We'll hear from Holly in a little bit. And then also with me today is the two program officers from NOAA, Ben Sweeney and Abby Sherwin, who we'll also be hearing from in a little bit. Ben and Abby, feel free to give a wave. And if you're joining us live today, if you could please put your name and organization in the chat, that would be great. And while you're with us for this webinar, please do stay muted unless you're asking a question. And if you have a question that comes up throughout the presentation, please put it in the chat and we will try to either address it or save it for one of the two sections where we have designated for questions. And also feel free to use the raise hand feature if it's a question that just feels appropriate for the moment. We have a small group, so we welcome it. We are recording this and we'll send out the recording as well as the slide deck to any participants who registered, and the recording of the webinar will also be posted on the Maine webpage. So speaking of Maine is the Seafood Economic Accelerator of Maine. It's an industry-led initiative that developed a roadmap for the seafood sector in 2024. And Maine, through MDF, secured this sub-award from the Climate Resilience Regional Challenge Grant through the Governor's Office for Policy Innovation and the Future. GoPIF, that agency, is our regulatory partner in this, who applied for the funding from NOAA in order to bring the $69 million for resiliency efforts to the state of Maine. And Abby and Ben are going to provide some more background about this funding in a moment, but first I'm going to give a brief overview of what we'll cover in this session. Today, we will talk about the purpose and goals of this funding source, again, hearing from NOAA, as well as kind of like whittling it down to Maine's goals for this investment. And we'll talk about the eligibility criteria, as well as the timeline for this Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund. We will touch on some of the highlights of the program requirements, as well as the application process and scoring criteria. And then we'll do a walkthrough of the application as it is online and have ample time for questions at the end, as well as a pause in the middle for any questions that you have. And then we'll end with talking about some resources that will support your application process. All right, now I will hand it over to Abby and Ben.
Thanks, Sylvie, and good morning, everyone. Ben, I didn't know if you wanted to come off mute real quick just to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Abby. My name is Ben Sweeney. I'm the program officer for GoPIF's Climate Resilience Regional Challenge Award, and really excited to see this grant program coming online. So I'll turn it back to you, Abby.
Great, thanks, Ben. Perfect. And yeah, it's nice to be with you all this morning. I'm Abby Sherwin and am a resilience specialist with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. And my role is to work alongside Ben to provide technical assistance to Maine in support of the overall $69 million Resilient Maine project. As Sylvie mentioned, the Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund grant opportunity is part of the overall Resilient Maine project, which is a 5-year project funded through NOAA's Climate Resilience Regional Challenge, or CRRC program. And I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of the CRRC program just to help with some context setting for the SIAF, or Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund grant. So CRRC is a grant program providing almost $575 million in federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act in support of projects that build coastal community resilience. The program is administered by NOAA's Office for Coastal Management and has 4 primary pillars or goals, which are listed on the screen there, and are reducing risk from coastal hazards and climate impacts, meaningful community engagement, supporting regional collaboration, and lastly, promoting enduring capacity of grant recipients to advance coastal resilience efforts beyond the lifespan of the grant project. You can go to the next slide, Sylvie, please. The CRRC program funded a total of 18 projects across the country. You can see on the map the geographic distribution of those projects. The Maine project is one of only 2 projects funded in the Northeast. And of the 18 total projects funded, 8 are what we call Track 2 projects. Those are larger projects that are really focused on not only planning, but implementation. And the award amounts range from $60 to $70 million. And 10 of the 18 projects are what we call Track 1 projects. Those are primarily planning projects that are a bit smaller in scale and are in the $1 to $2 million range. Ben and I feel very fortunate to be supporting the Resilient Maine project and are here to help not only the Maine Development Foundation and Maine, but all of you potential applicants to the Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund with any technical assistance needs or grant administration questions that arise that really relate to the overall Resilient Maine project. So happy to help in any way we can. We are really here to be resources for all of you. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sylvie to continue the presentation.
Thanks so much, Ben and Abby. You all have been a lifeline, and I do feel very grateful for your support throughout this process of developing this grant opportunity, as well as administering it. The Seafood Infrastructure Adaptation Fund is for energy efficiency, conversions, and supply chain adaptations to public seafood infrastructure and and facilities that will provide a greater resilience to climate-related shocks and Maine's seafood economy. And Maine's goal for this investment is really seafood sector sustainability through resiliency towards economic and climate-related shocks. And when I mention seafood infrastructure, we're referring to facilities related to commercial fishing, aquaculture, seafood production, and supply chain. So it's a broad definition on that. And Maine is making up to $1 million in targeted investments thanks to this award, and it'll be through sub-awards ranging from $75,000 to $300,000. The RFA is currently open, and it will be open through June 30th of this year at 5 p.m. Next, we'll talk about eligibility. Eligible entities to apply include municipal, county, state, and tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, business owners, private property owners, and educational institutions. However, the applicant must be representing publicly owned or tribal owned infrastructure that serves the seafood economy. So properties must be public or tribal owned or have a public lease or easement with adequate public interest. And the public lease or easement needs to be in place at the time of application. This application is open for a few months until June 30th. So there is time potentially to secure that public lease or easement if you already have the appetite for it, if that property owner has the appetite for it. Eligible activities include retrofits or adaptations for energy efficiency conversions or cold storage installation into existing infrastructure. So no new construction is allowable. Some example projects would be off-grid solar upgrade and battery storage for an aquaculture infrastructure facility, or cold storage units installed into existing public facility, or installing backup energy sources for climate and weather-related resiliency. And I want to pause here because this is where most of the questions come from. Feel free to either put a question in the chat or even to take yourself off mute or use that raise hand feature if you have any questions about eligibility that aren't made clear here. Okay. If there's no questions, then we will keep rolling. All right, next we'll take a look at this timeline. This timeline is also on the CMaine webpage where the application is linked, and Perry put that link in the chat. The RFA is open, and it is open through June 30th at 5 p.m. Then the applications will be reviewed this summer, and notification of conditional award will go out in September. At that point, NOAA will conduct the environmental compliance review through the end of the year, and then we'll do final contracting for grant awards in January 2027. There will be a mandatory grantee orientation on February 1st. That's not featured on this timeline, but awardees will be notified. And project implementation will begin then, assuming all paperwork is complete. Contracting paperwork, I should say. Project completion is required by August 1st, 2029, and then we'll have final reporting and invoicing due August 15th, 2029, and there are no extensions allowable for this grant program. I do see, looks like Harbor Bait might be putting a question in the chat, so I'll pause just in case it's relevant to that eligibility or timeline. And my screen actually looks a little different. Are you seeing the program requirements slide come up? Great. Not sure what happened to mine, but we'll go with it. I will touch on the highlights of the program requirements. These are gone into in more depth in the grant manual that is linked from that application webpage. But the program is by reimbursement only, and there is a 5% match required, either cash or in kind. And NOAA will be doing an environmental compliance review. And the Build America, Buy America Act is applicable to any projects. Thanks for putting the link in the chat there, Perry, for that BA Build America, Buy America Act, if you want more information or background about that. And again, there are no exceptions. So the August 1st, 2029 project completion is a requirement. All right, and the application process for review will be conducted by a grant review committee. We'll have the review committee review all applications this summer and make funding decisions based on the following selection criteria. The grant review committee will be comprised of representatives from CMaine, Maine Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, Maine Department of Marine Resources, Department of Economic and Community Development, Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and NOAA. And criteria includes resiliency to the seafood sector for both economic and towards climate-related shocks, and that will be scored up to 25 points. The project and timeline descriptions will also be up to 25 points. The budget will be up to 15 points, as well as the administrative capability and risk assessment. And we'll take a look at what that means in the application in a little bit here. And then geographic distribution of applications may be considered. It's not going to be scored, but if there are applications that are scoring at the same level, we'll take into consideration that distribution of awards. And Harbor Bay, I do see your question, and this is a good time to pause before we switch screens up and look at the application. So we lease a portion of a town pier and would like to build new equipment to replace an outdated model to process bait fish. It is specialty equipment that must be fabricated. Would this be considered new construction? Would the construction be going, or excuse me, would the equipment be going into a existing facility, I think is the question, and feel free to take yourself off mute. Or yeah, keep working in the chat, whatever's easier. And I can say, while you're typing, the facility would need to be existing. and that facility would need to be municipal owned. And Ben and Abby, feel free to also jump in if you can think of anything else there. See what else Harbor Bait puts in the chat. While we're doing that, I'm going to stop my share screen. Yes, an existing facility that is owned by the town. Yes, that does sound allowable. And again, please, Ben and Abby, jump in, or Harbor Bait, this is a chance if you want to ask any further questions.
Yeah, I think you covered it really well, because it sounds like what's being described is equipment and not necessarily, the construction of a new facility, as you pointed out. So based on the information provided in the chat so far, I would agree that it sounds like this is likely eligible.
Great. And I'll pause just a moment. It looks like Co-op Office is asking a question that I suspect may be a similar eligibility question. But I see you've paused writing, so we'll continue. I'm going to take you all to the web page on the Maine website. At the top of the Maine website, there is this RFPs page. That's what this page is here. And before I start walking through the application, Co-op Office, thank you for this question. It's a good one, and it came up. Unfortunately, no. So the Land for Maine's Future Working Waterfront Covenant is not, it does not provide sufficient public benefit to meet the public ownership kind of lease easement requirement for this funding. But that's an important one. Thanks for asking that. So in terms of walking through the application, I'll also note, we'll touch on some of these resources at the end, but while we're here, you can get a visual on them. At the top of the page, it has the application link, as well as this preview application is a PDF version of the application. So you can, take a look at that, save it on your desktop, print it out for reference. The grant manual is linked here, as well as the FAQ, and that FAQ is a living document. So we will continue to update it as questions come in. And then where this button for registration for this session is, will become a button for accessing this recording after the fact. And we also have registration open for our open office hours. We're doing a few of those over the next few months. While registration is required, you can register at any time for any one of them. And there's not going to be any formal presentation for those, but it'll just be a pop-in Q&A. And then the NOFO that has some of the kind of high-level information is still posted at the bottom, along with this timeline. We'll go back up to the Apply Now, and the link for this is in the chat if you want to follow along, but we'll be sharing screen here. I'll note that it does take you to the MDF webpage for this application, and that's where you'll be getting the application submission message from as well. And this form does allow for saving your progress for up to 30 days. And I want to just call out that if you did go in and start filling out the application this afternoon and then didn't come back to it until June 29th, let's say, to finish it up, it would not be saved for that duration that the application is open. It's only 30 days. So you'll want to go back into the application, continue working on it, and it should then, and when you press save and continue, send you a new link for accessing that new version. It does not, however, save any uploads. And there's two sections for a work plan upload and a budget upload that we provide templates for, and those do not save. So if you do go as far as those sections, you'll need to make sure you upload those again before pressing submit. And it won't let you submit it without uploading them. So you'll get notification. But so in the first part of this application, after it describes some of the eligibility criteria, it'll ask for the project title and address. Then it'll ask for the applicant organization and description of the entity, as well as an EIN number. And then you'll have opportunity to put in contact information for one person, which would be required. And you can put in contact information for a second applicant as well, or second contact information, I should say. And then we get into the project overview. And this has both a start date as well as an end date. This end date is for the project. So August 1st, 2029 is the latest that that end date can be. And then it asks for the dollar amount you're requesting. If your project that you're applying for funding for is a part of a larger project, you can describe that larger project funding as well as timeline in this section, as well as a separate section below. This section we're looking for to be very fleshed out with what is being proposed to be done, where will it be done, and how will it be done. So spare no words in this section so that it's really thorough for the full scoring in that section. And then the project site has an option to select private if it is privately owned. And if you select private, it does ask for that, whether there's a current public lease or easement. And then in this next section down, it does ask for the description of that property ownership and the location, how it's currently being used, how it would be shifted. So Harbor Bay's example could, the explanation could come in there that it is a property owned by a municipality, but that it's leased by Harbor Bay. And then this is the work plan section that does have a file upload. So you'll see this blue is where this project work plan is linked. And we do ask you for some saving and naming requirements for the document. It's just project title work plan, pretty straightforward, but that will help with our filing system. And so you'll click on this work plan. It will bring you to a separate document that you will need to download. And Holly is going to go over the work plan template as well as the budget template and what those look like more in depth after we go through this application. But this is where you'll upload it. And then these next two questions are really about that industry impact, how your project is going to be positively influencing or impacting the seafood industry once it's complete, and asking about any demonstrated implementation of adaptation plans. Have vulnerabilities been assessed and addressed with your project? This is an opportunity to explain those here. Then we'll get into some financial information, the total project cost. Again, if it's this, it might be different than your grant amount requested, either because you have supplemental funding or it's a smaller part to a larger project or a certain phase of the project. And you can explain that with this budget narrative. There also is a budget narrative in this budget template. So again, there's a link for a spreadsheet. It's got multiple tabs. And Holly's going to go through how to work through that template. There is naming criteria there as well, project title and budget. And the last page of this budget template does have a section for putting some narrative in. And again, Holly will touch on that. This budget narrative can be more broad of any explanations that didn't feel they fit into that last page of the budget template, and also just explanation of what you use to inform your budget figures. Or explaining any estimates received. And then if there are any permitting that you're aware of that's going to be part of this project, there's a question about that here. And lastly, the administrative capability and risk assessment is really asking about your experience and any systems you have in place or personnel for managing this sub-award. And then it'll be the signatures, electronic signature. And again, the save and continue button is down here at the bottom that will save for 30 days. And you'll get a link to be able to access that. Any questions about this application form before we transition to Holly sharing? Okay, great. I will stop sharing that. And Holly, if you want to share your screen.
Okay.
Hand it over to you.
Okay. I will go over. I'm going to just stay off screen because I can't look straight at my computer and I'd feel strange having a side profile. But I will start with the work plan. So can everybody see this? I take it? Okay. So this is the basic, this is the second sheet of the work plan. It basically just says align your goal with, or your activities with your budget categories. That is actually a key thing to keep in mind, because if your work plan is tied to your outcomes, and your outcomes are tied to your performance, and your performance is tied to your budget, and your budget is tied to your reimbursement. So you definitely want to be sure that you are tying each goal and activity to a specific budget category. So I did kind of put an example here of what a goal represents. So the goal is the high level purpose that's aligned with the grant. So in this instance, you want to improve downtown coastal resilience planning capacity. Well, how are you going to do that? You're going to conduct stakeholder planning meetings with municipal officials, but you have to tie that to tangible outputs. So in this example, meeting summaries with attendance documentation. The measure is going to be 3 meetings completed with at least 10 participants. Timeline, start and end date, expected completion dates, and then tied to a budget category. In this example, it's tied to salaries and wages because you have staff attending meetings. You could also tie that to travel for staff. So, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Each goal of your project, you have to tie it to a specific activity with specific deliverables that are measurable and are tied to your budget. Does anybody have any questions? I don't want to go too deep into that because it's kind of self-explanatory, I guess. Okay.
That's great, Holly. Yeah, and I'll just point out she is on 2 different tabs there. So the first, when you open up the template, you might just see that instruction tab, and then you go down to the bottom to access the second tab, scope and work plan. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to just stop sharing while I pull up the budget template. That one is a little more involved. Okay.
It's where you really get to have some fun.
With me. I have so many things open. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. So here is the grant budget workbook that I created specific for this project. And I designed it so that it would autofill the match requirements as well as any indirect, and really kind of help you build it out so that it's thorough. So and I also built it to ensure that all of the budgets that get submitted through the application process are consistent, transparent, and compliant with the NOAA federal grant requirements. So some of the first things, so there's multiple tabs. You'll see them here at the bottom. The instruction sheet, anything highlighted in this yellow is where you're going to enter information. So you need to put in your company's organization's legal name, the contact, email, phone, address, your UEI if you have one, your employer EIN number, the project title, and the project period start and end date. And it can't be before February 1st, 2027, and the end date cannot be after August 1st, 2029. So just the broad instructions, you want to do the cover sheet first, and then the input sheets, which is the second sheet. This is going to drive a lot of the data. So this is where you would put your default fringe rate for your salaries and wages if you are including that in your budget. Some people use 30%. It's whatever your rate is for your organization. And if you have an indirect rate, I just have it populated with some defaults. But you can update this as it applies to your organization. Does anyone have any questions about fringe rates and indirect rates, just so that there's no confusion as to what those are? Okay. As you know, this is a 5% match required program. So that is already populated, and you do need to reference your source and describe what your match is. It can be either time and effort from staff that you're not charging. It can be donated services or space for meetings, but you also have to back up anything with your match. It has to be documented and tangible. You can't just say, you have to show timesheets if people are part of it. So the next tab that you're going to complete is the personnel, and this is if anyone in your organization is going to be working on the project, and you need to name the person or their role. And in this second column, the type is either going to be senior key personnel or other. And the annual base salary, the fringe override is where you can adjust the fringe percent from the input screen to a lower or higher rate depending on the person. It's not required to do anything with it. The salaries and fringe are going to auto update as you put in information. So I'm going to just put office manager, and we're going to make that. I'm just giving you some. And then you want to base it on percent of effort. So obviously, if they're not spending 100% of time, but you average, they might be doing 20% of their time working on this project. You just reference that. And again, when we go to the budget justification sheet, that's where you're going to explain the work that these people are doing, how you came up with the calculation, how you came up with your fringe rate, and what's included in your fringe. So this is just to get the numbers. And again, you can't change anything in this document unless it's this yellow-orange color. It just protects it and makes it a little easier so that there aren't any errors. If you don't have salaries, that's fine, but salaries tend to be a good driver of cost. So in this next sheet, the other direct costs, this is where you're going to list everything else out. Column B, under category, you're going to pick from the drill down. Is this supplies, travel, construction, other, or contracts? Type in the description, name a vendor if you know who the vendor is, the total cost. If you are claiming an indirect rate, you would indicate whether this will be part of the indirect rate application, which will be on the next tab, and I'll go through that. If you hit so this will auto populate the indirect on the next sheet. So you just fill this out for each of your budget categories for each of the line items, and you'll do the justification on the last sheet. So the indirect, as you can see here, the personnel totals that I entered on the personnel sheet, and then also the $10,000 that I just added on the other direct costs, you can see that it's auto-calculating what your indirect cost will be added to your budget. So tried to make this as easy as possible. And then all of your numbers from each of those input screens will then total in your budget summary with the match already calculated for you. So that they're just to make it easier for everybody. And then under the last tab, the budget justification, this is where you're going to go in, and I put a description in of, describe each person, number of hours, your fringe benefits, what's included, and so on for each of the line items within your budget. So the more explanation, the better, because then it's easier for reviewers to confirm that the costs are, following federal guidelines and are allowable, allocable, consistently treated, and able to be documented adequately. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Thanks so much, Holly. All right, feel free if anyone does have any questions, raise a hand or pop it in the chat. And let's see, get back to our slides here. One thing that I wanted to pull out, I realized I had not mentioned, is that 10% of the total grant award will be withheld until reporting and invoices are submitted. So that is, a technicality and something that is common. It'll be in the sub-award grant agreement, but wanted to make note of that. It is our time for questions. It's been a quiet group, so we've gone through this pretty quickly. I know a number of folks joined a little late, so a reminder that this recording will be live on the CMaine RFP's webpage by the end of the week, I'll say, and if not before. And I'll go over some resources that will be supportive in completing your application process, unless anyone has any questions. All right, well, we'll talk about some of these resources that I briefly mentioned when we were looking at the RFP's webpage. If you go to the CMaine site, there is the grant manual, and that has more in-depth explanation of this application process. There's also an FAQ doc that's linked, and that's a living document. So when questions continue to come in, we will add them to that document. And probably the most valuable is the staff support. MDF has staff available to answer questions. If you're working on that budget and you have a question, we can connect you with Holly. If it's something to do with eligibility or a lease agreement, we can connect you with the NOAA program officers, Ben and Abby, and we are here to support you, so you can reach out anytime. In addition to that, we'll also be holding open office hours over the next 3 months. So April 8th, May 13th, and June 10th, we will have open office hours from 12:30 to 2 p.m. There is a registration link for those, just so we don't have the, live meeting link live for anyone to stumble into, but it's a quick registration. You select which date you're registering for, but honestly, it's the same link for all three. So if you were to register for the first and then realize on June 10th, oh, I have a question, I want to jump in, you've already got the link, or you could register in the moment and get the link day of to pop in at any time between that 12:30 and 2 p.m. Thanks for putting that link in the chat, Perry. The open office hours will not have any presentation component. It'll just be a time when you can talk to someone, face to face on screen, and ask any questions. And then I mentioned the recording of this webinar will be made live. I do want to note that on June 10th at 3 p.m. in the afternoon will be the cutoff for any guaranteed responses for application questions. So we are open available for the next 4 months nearly. And at that point, when questions received after that time on June 10th are not guaranteed a response. It doesn't mean you won't get one. We'll do our best to get one, but because we'll be busy kind of reviewing applications that are submitted and making sure they're complete, we have a caveat for that last couple weeks of the RFA open submission time. We really appreciate your all time in joining us, and please do visit the CMaine site for all of those supporting materials. We hope you have a successful application kind of process and submission, and reach out with any questions. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.